This is a general introduction to Romanticism, with specific reference to English and American literature. The aim is to make it easier and more fun for students and general readers to read, understand, and appreciate Romantic texts. Initially, a distinction needs to be made between Romanticism as a moment in literary texts and as a movement in the canon. As a moment, it has existed since the dawn of literature, since the very beginning. There are so many romantic moments in, say, Gilgamesh, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and we have it in some medieval and Elizabethan lyrics, in Anne Bradstreet's poem Contemplations, and in many other works, ancient and modern. As a movement, however, Romanticism refers to a specific era. It started at the end of the 18th century with the publication of the lyrical ballads by William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge in 1798, and drew to a close around 1850. In America, it flourished in the 1820s and came to an end in the early 1860s with the advent of the Civil War. Some extend the dates a bit earlier or a bit later. Who are the major Romantic authors? The male Romantic writers within the British context include Blake, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley, Keats, and Byron, who achieved fame largely as poets, and Lamb, Hazlitt, and De Quincey, who excelled in prose. English women writers include Mary Shelley, Emily and Charlotte Bronte, and Dorothy Wordsworth. Within the American context, the male writers include Freneau, Bryant, Irving, Emerson, Thoreau, Poe, Whitman, Hawthorne, and Melville. The female authors include Margaret Fuller and Emily Dickinson. Let's delve deeper into Romanticism now. What are Romanticism's main premises, main ideas? Clearly, Romanticism is highly complex and rich, and one may speak about Romanticisms in the plural rather than Romanticism in the singular, for the authors and texts that are classified under it have their own distinct features, differences, and peculiarities. Nevertheless, one can also trace overall similarities, hence the reference to it as a movement or school of thought. Historically and contextually, many see the movement as a reaction against the era that directly preceded it, namely the Enlightenment or the Age of Reason. The Enlightenment, which coincided with and brought about the first industrial revolution, stressed science, technology, inventions, philosophy, politics, and knowledge of the world. It also privileged capitalism, materialism, wealth, and societal engagement. A lot of focus was given to reason and rationalism. The Romantics saw many of these preoccupations as placing more emphasis on the individual's external condition than the internal, and the collective than the individual. They felt that the individual self within such a context becomes alienated from itself and is ultimately lost in these external and collective pursuits and in society's ways, customs, and habits. Romanticism wanted individuals to be in constant touch with themselves, and their focus to always be more inner than outer. On this basis, it called for a counter inner enlightenment, so to speak. In rebelling against the Age of Reason, the Romantics sought to herald an age of emotion, intuition, contemplation, and imagination. An age not of reason, but of the mind. And this, according to the Romantics, can be made possible only when the self disengages from society, at least as a first step. Thus, the Enlightenment privileges life in society, Romanticism privileges life in nature. In fact, one important motto in Romanticism is leave society and go to nature. Why nature, one may ask? Nature offers numerous opportunities and benefits to the individuals. The first is withdrawal from the many communal obligations and distractions. most of whose implications the Romantics view as detrimental. Where there is much toil and trouble in society, Wordsworth says in his poem, The Tables Turned, a poem which turns the tables against science, against rationalism, and life in society as a whole, there is tranquility, solitude, and peace of mind in nature. Nature offers a safe space, as we say these days, for the distracted, disoriented, and oppressed self, providing it with a refuge, a retreat, and a home. One goes to nature in order to cleanse, rehabilitate the self, and enable it to recuperate and embark on a journey of self-discovery, self-building, and self-reliance. Nature is celebrated precisely because it is conducive to the self's ability to get in touch with itself, especially since one must go to nature alone. When one goes to nature, in other words, one connects with one's own nature. But there are a lot of other benefits, both immediate and ultimate, lower and higher, micro and macro. These include, at an immediate and basic level, joy. There is so much to please in nature. Nature is beautiful, and its beauty makes the self feel good. A thing of beauty is a joy forever, says Keats. The Romantics value the emotional, affective, and psychological dimension in the self's relation to nature. Nearly all natural elements evoke positive feelings and uplift one's spirit. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky, Wordsworth says. It is as if the Romantics were saying, one has the right to feel good, and joy is a necessity. There is so much on the brighter side in nature. But it is not all milk and honey. It is not all summer and spring. There are obviously autumn and winter, as Shelley, Keats, Thoreau, and others remind us. Nevertheless, even the harsher and darker sides of nature, to which the Romantics refer as the sublime, is also advantageous. The excitement, thrill, and fear that come from uncommon, exotic, gothic, and supernatural experiences, which are aptly described by Blake, Coleridge, the Shelleys, Keats, Byron, and De Quincey, ultimately enrich the self's experience, welfare, and wisdom. Some of the darker Romantics, like Poe, Bronte, Mary Shelley, and Dickinson, and the Romantic skeptics like Hawthorne and Melville, push the boundaries further to reveal some immensely frightening, disturbing, and even destructive sides of nature. And this is where Romanticism perhaps borders on naturalism. And there are higher and loftier benefits and experiences still. These include the more intellectual, mental, and imaginative dimensions. Nature makes one ponder, expostulate, think, contemplate, meditate, and imagine. Imagination is key in Romanticism, and one of the ultimate ends. One of nature's main functions is to trigger the imagination, unlock and open the mind. There is so much in nature for the eye and the other five senses, but there is so much for the soul and the mind also. But when the mind opens and reveals the laws which traverse the universe, then shrinks the great world at once into a mere illustration and fable of the mind, says Emerson. Put simply, the idea here is that when one wanders with an A into nature, one wonders with an O about so many issues and questions, and then elevates and sublimates. As a result of the self's encounter with nature, one also learns, gets a first-rate education, and gains wisdom. Nature is a vehicle of thought, says Emerson, and in Walden, Thoreau says that he worked 6 weeks to sustain himself, and the rest of the year he had free and clear for study of nature and the universe, that is. One impulse from a vernal wood may teach you more of man, of moral evil and of good, than all the sages can, says Wordsworth in The Tables Turned. And in the same poem he also says, let nature be your teacher. According to the Romantics, who did not think highly of society's educational institutions, nature is the best educational institution. Melville, one of the most important Romantics who spent much of his life as a sailor in the oceans, says in Moby Dick, a whale ship is my Yale College and my Harvard. Romanticism, it should be emphasized, is about building self-culture as opposed to the hegemonic societal culture, about creating intellectuals and cultured individuals instead of followers or imitators. How does all of this come about? All such benefits and others are brought about by a simple walk, an excursion, a journey, or a sojourn in nature. Any encounter with nature is positive, no matter how brief. Just step into nature with an open heart and things begin to happen. But the longer one travels in nature, and the farther one goes in the direction of the remote and the exotic, the more impact there is, and the deeper the experience. One motto in Romanticism at this very level is farther and further. The journey in Romanticism generally takes one or more of three interconnected forms: a journey forward, a journey upward, and a journey backward. The first and the second happen when one wanders into nature, and then as a result wonders, thinks, contemplates, and then transcends. And the second and the third, when one recollects either past experiences of nature or childhood memories, as a result of which the self achieves another form of transcendence and elevation. One fundamental premise is necessary to highlight. For all of the romantic benefits to happen, and for a text to be considered romantic, there has to be an interaction between the self and nature. And there has to be an effect of nature on the self. Going to nature, literally or through memory, is essential for the romantic experience to happen. But simply going there and not engaging with nature will not suffice, will not qualify the experience to be romantic. And it is important to distinguish at this level between what is referred to as nature poetry or nature literature and romantic poetry and romantic literature. The former is when the text confines itself to describing and celebrating nature, the way a romantic text does, but without interaction between the speaker and the natural elements described, and without a noticeable or substantial effect of nature on the self. The romantic text, by contrast, is about the self's active engagement or interaction with the scene, one that is substantial and transformative. Hence the reference to romantic texts as descriptive meditative, unlike in nature poetry, where the text is largely descriptive. How does the interaction work, and to what end? Generally, the interaction between the self and nature happens due to the encounter between the five senses and the physical landscape, so-called body of nature. Any individual seeking a romantic experience in nature must generally begin by making use of one or more of the five senses in experiencing any one or more of the natural elements, as a result of the eye watching the daffodils, for example, or the ear listening to the song of the nightingale. A pleasant sensory experience emerges, which is an outcome of what M.H. Abrams calls the transaction between the sense and the seen, and eventually mind and matter. But the sensory experience, which M.H. Abrams locates within the natural dimension, is only one level of engagement. Other levels, higher and deeper, follow the initial point of contact, and these are the metasensory, metaphysical, or in the words of Abrams, the supernatural. It is when the self transcends the body, which is a prison in the Platonic sense, transcends the world of materiality, and transcends common, mundane daily experiences. This is what most romantics are after, and this is where Romanticism meets Transcendentalism. Of course, transcendence in Romanticism is momentary, but it gets repeated several times. Two final clarifications need to be made. The first clarification is that Romanticism is not solely about the relationship with nature. The romantic experience can also materialize as a result of reading certain types of books, specifically books that evoke the imagination, such as the Arabian Nights, a book which is read, cherished, and complimented by many romantics. Art also can do the job that nature does, as illustrated clearly in Keats's Ode to a Grecian Urn, and so does the theater, as in the case of De Quincey. Even involvement in action in society, as Emerson stresses, can also contribute to the self's joy, elevation, and transcendence if action is implemented with the aim of upholding romantic principles and ideals. The second clarification is that Romanticism is essentially a reform movement. Its aim is to reform society. Though it calls upon the individual to disengage from it at the start, such disengagement is temporary and out of necessity, and for the purpose of preparing for that reform. One disengages from society in order, as mentioned earlier, to enable the self to rehabilitate and reform itself. Societal reform begins with self-reform, and this appears to be the first major phase in the process. The implicit logic here is that if each person reforms themselves, society is ultimately reformed. However, since this may be a bit far-fetched, as those who end up engaging with self-reform are the few, then it is the job of those who reform themselves to head back to society and lead the change. It is important to remember here that the Romantics were influenced by the French and American revolutions, both of which aimed at reforming the self and society. But it is also important to remember that the Romantics influenced other reform movements and reformers, such as Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Social reform, therefore, is a major romantic preoccupation, perhaps the ultimate end. The important motto here seems to be, once you recover and build yourself in nature, head back to society to spearhead reform, in peaceful, non-violent ways, of course, as Emerson and Thoreau have demonstrated. The romantic journey seems to come full circle. At the start, the romantics leave society and head to nature, seeking peace of mind and the opportunity to work on themselves. But when they are ready, they come back to society to live on their own terms and embark on societal improvement. To sum up, Romanticism then is about beauty, joy, emotions, and feelings. It is about nightingales and flowers. It is about momentary transcendence from physicality and materiality, and transcendence of social ills and cultural prejudice. But it is also about education and societal reform. Its end result, in fact, is a better individual and a better society.